Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, an awful neighbor built a resort on my inherited property while I was gone. He claims he took over my inheritance and owns everything I got. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the video. The title story starts like this. The thing about the Japanese housing market that most people don't understand is that they are built to depreciate in value. There's more value in the land that the houses are built on than the houses themselves, and this is done on purpose. So here in Japan, when you know that your home is going to be worthless after 20 or 30 years, you have more freedom to design your home in a manner that is pleasing to you and not what will be pleasing to future buyers. And while this can lead to people not looking after their homes or the houses not being built properly, it doesn't really matter because you will end up knocking the old place down and building a new one that matches your taste. There's also another reason too. As everyone knows, Japan is home to a lot of natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, Godzilla, etc. It feels like almost every year the safety agencies come out with new ideas, new schemes and new designs to make buildings safer. Could you imagine trying to update millions of buildings to keep up with the ever-changing regulations? Hefty fines abound if you do not keep up with these rules too. Basically, since the end of World War II, it would be very hard to find anyone that appreciates an old home. The idea of renovating an old family home never used to be appealing, as it used to be easier, cheaper and more widely accepted to just demolish the home and build a new one. I say never used to be because slowly but surely people are coming around to the idea of renovating old properties rather than just demolishing everything. But OP, I hear you call, I've seen lots of ancient Japanese buildings, and yes, while I do hear you on this and I know what buildings you're referring to, these are not even ancient Japanese buildings but the medieval period Waiyo Kenchiku, which is a Chinese-inspired form of architecture. It's mostly temples and spiritual sites that still stand. Anything else tends to be abandoned and forgotten places or areas where there's some confusion about who actually owns the land and lawyers are busy trying to work something out. You might be wondering if I'm some sort of Japanese property and land ownership buff, or perhaps I'm one of these property owners. But no, I'm a simple office drone for a middling instant noodle company. I know all about Japanese property law because of an incident I recently went through. It all started when my mother passed away. She was nearly 100 years old, 97 to be exact, and she had been struggling with her health for a number of years. We all pretty much expected her to pass quite a while ago, but she has a stronger will than anyone I've ever seen before. So when she finally passed, it was no big shock and we were all pretty much prepared for it, except for my younger sister, who was off in France at the time. After the ceremony, my mother's estates were divided up as per her will, and while my sister got most of the monetary inheritance, I was left with my mother's home and property in the mountains a couple of hours' drive from the city I'm living in. This was accepted as my sister lived in France, so it wouldn't make sense for her to have the property. Not that I had any plans for it myself, as I said, there is no value locked in housing. My intention was to let the place depreciate over the next few years and then sell the land or maybe even build a holiday home there. The mountains are quite beautiful during the summer and perfect for skiing during the winter. I was even considering turning it into a touristy type thing. Back then, Airbnb was a new thing and seemed quite profitable. So anyway, I accepted the inheritance and then promptly forgot about it for a while I concentrated on my own family and career. I cannot quite remember, but I think about 3 or so years went by and I was due a vacation. A break from work as things were getting stressful with the instant noodle company. They wanted to press into distributing more openly overseas, expanding the brand and whatnot. The attack plan was pretty intense and stress was reaching an all-time low, so the boss decided to send everyone away on a stress-relieving break. Probably more like an all-time high. Anyway, yes, the bosses do that. They send workers on vacation if they feel we are getting too stressed and overworked. I know some places where the CEO will take the whole company on vacation, not having to pay a single yen for the holiday. Well, my company didn't do that much, but provided a little bonus in the wage slip at the end of the month to help pay for the forced vacation. I decided that I would take the opportunity to drive up to the mountains and check on my mother's old home, which is now my home, kind of. During the long drive up there, I was going through my head all the mess I was gonna have to sort through. I had already done some, and soon after my mother's passing, I cleared out a lot of her stuff, but there was still some work that needed to be done before I could have the place demolished and rebuilt. I met the neighbor during that brief visit and he seemed like a nice enough person, a little too nosy about what had happened to my mom and a little too interested in what I was planning to do with the property. I realized why when I pulled up to the driveway. At first I thought I pulled into the wrong driveway. I reversed out and drove around, only to pull into the same drive again. What should have been an old rundown property built sometime in the 1970s was now actually a pretty stylish multi-story house with a couple rental cars parked outside it. It was like a little neat mountain resort that you sometimes see in these romantic movies that I usually despise. I knocked on the door and had some Caucasian guy answer the door. He was just as confused to see me standing there as I was to see him. He thought at first it was the owner with some fresh towels. Imagine the man's shock when I tell him that I'm the owner and I had no idea that this house was here. He gets all defensive, tells me the owner is the guy that lives next door, and I suddenly twig why the neighbor was so interested in my mom's property. Apparently, as I find out much later, the neighbor had been interested in the property for a long time and kept harassing my mother about selling it to him, but she was adamant that I was gonna have it as I work too hard in the city. My mother was always saying I work too hard, so I go to confront the neighbor and I ask him why he thought he could just build this random resort on my property and ask him to explain himself. Well, he immediately starts going off on how the property was abandoned and he had every right to build a resort on it if he wished. Well, clearly it was not abandoned because I was here to take care of it. We get into a bit of a heated argument that almost came to fists, but I decided to walk away. I knew I was in the right and the lawyers were gonna prove it. I storm off telling him that my lawyers will clear this up, and had I still had my senses about me, I might have noticed then how nervous he got about bringing in the authorities. It took forever to get everything cleared up. My lawyers were having a hard time trying to get a hold of the neighbor, who would mysteriously never be around when called upon or never answered summons and search. It was important that they got to speak to him because there was a lot of stuff that needed to be cleared up. He actually ended up countersuing me for dubious reasons, claiming that I'm a fraudster who threatened to hurt him and tried to evict him from his own property. The case quickly evolved from just being about building on someone else's property to much bigger issues. This is where I started to learn a lot about Japanese property laws. It came to a point where the police actually got involved as there were clear signs of law breaking and there was talk of prosecution and jail time. About 8 months or so later, the neighbor is finally caught, arrested and brought to charges. The neighbor ended up getting charged for trespass, and you would think it would be something much bigger given that he built on my property, but in Japan you can't do that, so as long as you get permission, otherwise it is just trespass. He would have gotten away with a simple fine because of that, but there was something more. The business he was operating the guest house under was not registered, which is a massive deal in Japan, and to top it all off, the one thing that got this neighbor thrown behind bars for a long time, it was tax evasion. He had not registered the business because he wanted to keep all the money for himself. How he managed to advertise without this coming to the notice of these vacation business, I will never know. But at least my neighbor saved me half the trouble and money of building a little vacation house for myself, and in fact he ended up paying me to build on the property as he was forced to pay reparations for the property he destroyed. And yeah, Ripe Stars, if you enjoyed this Japanese revenge story, then please don't forget to like the video and maybe even leave a comment because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. The next one is another revenge story. I had a trophy wife client who had a frozen yogurt business paid for by her husband. They contacted me and asked me to design and build a new website for her business. I gave them a quote and they asked if they could pay in 3 installments. After we all agreed to the terms, I had written approval and I received my 33% deposit. I got cracking. We had regular check-ins and they were happy with the progress until one day they just went quiet. They were already behind on the second payment and I was growing impatient. I was done with the site and just needed final approval and payment before launching it, but I couldn't get a hold of either of them. I eventually got a hold of the lady at her day job after weeks of being ghosted. She calmly told me that they found someone cheaper and that they won't be paying the remaining 66% even though the project was complete and all their feedback was addressed. She told me that I could just give her 33% the files and move on with my life. I made it clear that websites don't really work if you only upload 33% of the files, sarcastically, at which point she hung up the phone. I still had their FTP details for their brand domain that housed their current/old website, so I decided to take revenge. I created a page with an animated fake loading bar that was stuck at 33%. Underneath the loading bar was the message, "This company doesn't pay their suppliers." They decided to pay only a third of the price, so now they have only a third of the website. I went as far as to download the website file, split it up in roughly 3 portions, file size, and upload a zip folder containing a third of the files to the FTP folder. This way I actually gave them the 33% they paid for, and I could show the file size to prove it. I also permanently deleted the old site's files from the folder so they could not restore from a backup. Not that they would have a clue how to do that, they threatened to sue me and I'm still waiting. And the next one is a story from r/am_I_the_jerk. This whole thing is so dumb, but I'm thinking that maybe I'm being too petty or something and I want to get other people's perspective on it. So I, 22 female, have a cute little VW that my grandfather gave me when I got my license at 20. I know that's a little late, but I had a fear of driving and just kept putting it off until I had no choice but to learn. To celebrate, my granddad bought an '02 Beetle from one of his friends and fixed it up for me. He runs an auto shop, so we were able to get it painted my favorite color too, which I'm really happy about. It's adorable and pink and I love it so much, I'll probably never sell it even when it doesn't run anymore. No one has ever really had an issue with my car, the most I get is people telling me it's cute. However, my neighbor totally hates it. She came over about a week after I moved in with my roommates and told me that my car was an eyesore and messed with the curb appeal of the neighborhood. I said I was sorry she felt that way, but I didn't know what exactly she expected me to do about it. She asked that I park it in the garage, but I cannot do that because it's a 1-car garage and between the 3 people that live in this house, 2 of us drive. The one that parks in the garage works from home, so it wouldn't make sense for me to take that spot since they'd have to move their car out of the driveway every morning so I could go to work. I thought that was the end of it, but then she sent a complaint to the HOA, and when that didn't work, she started posting on the neighborhood app making up reasons to get upset with the loud college kids across the way, and lately it's just been her coming outside to take pictures of my car after I park it in the driveway. Now when I catch her doing it, I press the key fob so the horn honks. The first few times it scared her, but now it just pisses her off enough to make her storm back in her house. I did it again today when I got home from work and saw her, and she ended up leaving a note in our mailbox saying that I was being childish and disruptive and she was gonna report me for targeted harassment. I'm not too worried about that last part, but my roommates think that I've made it worse by honking the horn and that since she's not really bothering me by taking pictures, I'm being childish in my response. Edit, I'm not setting off the alarm, it's that little beep noise that cars make when you lock them. I've got no clue where she's posting the pictures she is taking or what she is doing with them. And by the way, the car, her name is Ophelia, is not an obnoxiously bright pink or anything, it's a pastel pink. Think like cotton candy but a little lighter than that. Also, I'm gonna stop by the local police station on my way home from work and ask them if there's anything they can do to get her to just stop and mind her own business. Usually, even when you call the non-emergency line here, they just send the cops anyway, so I feel like going and explaining the situation to them in person will probably be easier and also waste less people's time. And yeah, Ripe Stars, please let me know in the comments what you think about this. Do you think that OP is the a-hole here or not? Let me know in the comments. And a person on Reddit said, it's an eyesore? Because it's a color she doesn't like? That's so ridiculous. Personally, I would start by calling the non-emergency police line and tell them that you have someone that is constantly documenting when you are home by taking pictures of your car and posting them online. You don't know what their intent is and you are scared for yourself, the property and your roommates. It will also have the cops talking to her once and maybe she will stop. Also, not the a-hole. Comment number 2, not the a-hole, but stop. Because now you're giving her grounds to report you. Look, you have a phone, right? Just turn the tables and record her when she approaches to take a picture. Take pictures and documents, so now you have grounds to report her. But stop with the noise, you're definitely annoying your other neighbors too. And the next one is a revenge story and it is titled Getting Revenge on a Terrible Boss. A few years ago, I worked at a big retail company and had for many years. Eventually, I went through enough grad school education to get my license to work at a higher level. Much more pay, more job satisfaction, more responsibilities, fancy title, but the job market was rough. I stayed on with my company to work in a floater position where I would cover a large area and work at all the stores within that area on a rotating but irregular basis. Eventually, I wanted to get a staff position where I have a single store assigned. The area was huge, the furthest store being over 100 miles from my home, and that's exactly where I was assigned to train for the new role. It was a rough store, folks in my position were robbed and assaulted at gunpoint, the neighborhood was very unfriendly, volume at the store was among the highest in the state, staff turnover was, as you might expect, extreme. But well, after training I was not really being scheduled to float to other stores, once a month at most. I asked to be scheduled a little more diversely, since most of the stores in my area were much closer to my home and did not require 4 hours of driving a day. Bossman told me that I was the only floater experienced enough to handle that store. I didn't buy it, but what can you do, right? Well, a colleague told me about the mileage reimbursement policy. Floaters working at a store more than 50 miles from home can file for reimbursement of mileage over that 50 miles each way, and it can even include meals. So I filled a few of these out and sent them to my boss to sign. He did not quite refuse, but he never actually signed and filed them. I suspect as soon as I left his office at our district center, he tossed them out. Bossman tells me later that they must be lost in the system. Eventually, the same colleague showed me how to fax those same forms to accounts payable, bypassing the district bossman. So I started doing just that. One day, bossman calls me in a panic. He wants to stop me filing the forms. I ask to be floated closer to home, but he won't budge. He needs me at that miserable store. He promises me he will make me a staff role at the store if I promise to stop faxing those forms. Staff roles are a promotion and usually come with better pay and a few other little conveniences, so I agree. Bossman says there won't be a pay bump right away, but that will come down the road. That never happened though. 2 years later, the situation at the store has become too toxic for even me. I asked to step down from the position to be a floater again and be allowed to float to other stores. Bossman says that I'm already a floater, never was in a staff position, but that he cannot let me work at other stores because it's better for me and the customers if I stay there for familiarity. Floaters don't get scheduled to stores exclusively, so I'm being singled out because they are still desperate to cover the dump of a store. I'm livid, so I start looking. It took me months, but eventually I found an opportunity to make my dream career transition. What I did was, I put in my formal notice and that's when the fun started. Remember that whole mileage reimbursement policy? Well, I kept meticulous track of all my shifts and there's no statute of limitations baked into the policy, so I started filling out those reimbursement forms to retroactively cover every single shift from the past 2 odd years. I skipped the meal part since I didn't want to go through all that effort of finding receipts. I had a friendly store manager sign off on them and I started sending them to accounts payable directly again. I did not fax them all in at once, but for each shift in my final 2 weeks I faxed a few dozen in. We still have fax machines in that line of work, believe it or not. I figured, what do I have to lose? Worst case scenario, accounts payable declines the forms. On my last few shifts, I started getting the checks from accounts payable, not added to my paycheck but sent to me directly. Mileage reimbursements are non-taxable income, so this was all tax-free money coming to me. It must have taken a while for the changes to show up on a balance sheet, because a few weeks after my final paycheck, I got a call from my now former bossman. He was not happy, he got some big loss prevention manager involved and together they started saying I was breaking some rule by requesting the payments. They specifically claimed that I was ineligible because I agreed I would not be eligible in a staff position. They then threatened legal action against me if I did not remit the full amounts back that same week. But I had the email chain from when bossman said I was never staff and always a floater. I politely referenced that email chain before letting them know firmly that because I was lied to, our prior agreement didn't apply and I was fully eligible all along. Corporate policy, as confirmed by HR, agreed with me, so I let them know that I was not returning a single penny. In the end, the reimbursements amounted to well over $21,000 and I transitioned into my dream job. I could say that I would trade that money back for the time I lost commuting to that miserable store, 4 hours every shift, but all that pressure motivated me to make the best career move of my life. The great satisfaction of not only professionally surpassing my old boss, but getting to tell him that his lies cost him way more on the way out is almost priceless. I also shared my story and method with many colleagues who were being told wrongly by the bossman that they didn't qualify for this policy. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.